This is History Myths and Misconceptions. And today's misconception is Homer. People usually don't quite understand the importance of the works of Homer, the Iliad and the Odyssey. These are not just important books that deal with Greek mythology. In fact, it is quite probably the oldest books in existence that came down to us as a whole, and not in bits and pieces. That fact alone makes them absolutely priceless artifacts. But this is not the only misconception that people have. There's a figure of Homer to whom these works are attributed. The popular opinion is that, once upon a time in ancient Greece, he was a poet and he wrote the Iliad. Well, it is not entirely valid, it is a terrible oversimplification. We don't really know when and where Homer lived, or if he even existed. We can have educated opinions on the subject and advance a number of theories. This is called the Homeric Question, an ongoing debate about the authorship of the Iliad and the Odyssey, the language of the epics, and the historicity of Homer as a person. First of all, there is a certain possibility that the Iliad and the Odyssey were composed, or put together and edited, by more than one person. Even the language of the two epic poems is slightly different, and there's a school of thought that it means that there were at least two Homers, one for the Iliad and one for the Odyssey. This Homer, or Homers, the multiple authors, most likely lived in the 8th or the 7th century BC. But we don't know for sure. The language of Homer's works is a separate subject. It is essentially a mishmash of different ancient Greek dialects. But the number of words from Ionic dialects may imply that this Homer entity lived somewhere in Anatolia, which is in present-day Turkey. Homer is also a bit more confident with the geography of this particular region compared to the other regions of the Greek world. Then there is a theory that became popular in the first half of the 20th century, after Milman Parry published his works on the style of Homer's poetry. This theory is pretty much dominating the Homeric studies these days. It goes like this. The works of Homer are probably based on oral tradition, so technically there could be numerous people who, so to speak, authored the Iliad and the Odyssey. Who and when assembled this folklore into a definitive edition with fixed structure is a different subject. Now, you should always be cautious with all these claims about oral tradition and folk tales. It is a popular 19th century trope when people were quote-unquote collecting folklore and then publishing it. All these nice medieval fairy tales and poems which were actively used in the process of nation building and presented as works produced by the nation itself or some ethnic group on a certain territory. This is usually quite suspicious, especially given the fact that the collective, so to speak, hive mind of the nation cannot really create literature. It is mostly the work of particular individuals. In the case of Homer, it becomes complicated. Even though we have this idea of oral tradition, it makes a lot of sense. Milman Parry quite successfully demonstrated that Homer uses what is called formulas, or formulae, if you're a language purist. In short, these formulas are expressions that are repeatedly used in the text, like swift-footed Achilles, or Hector of the shining helm. And the main purpose is to provide pre-constructed blocks that can easily fit into the rhythm of the poetry. Both the Iliad and the Odyssey use dactylic hexameter. So these ready-made blocks make it much easier for a bard to improvise instead of just learning the pre-written collection of texts, especially if he cannot read. This observation was reinforced by Parry's study of bards in early 20th century Bosnia, where they still maintained the tradition of doing pretty much that, engaging in singing long, half improvised stories. Our contemporary analogy would be some form of largely improvised battle rap. Obviously, all of this means that even if initially there was some oral tradition, at some point somebody codified it in the present form, and probably later edited it over the next centuries to create a definitive edition, so to speak. It is quite self evident and it required actual authors, not just more or less abstract ancient bards, especially since the stories told in Homer's works are quite complex. Take a look at the Odyssey, which has a very interesting, well crafted structure. In the end, we have a situation when we have no idea if Homer was one person or multiple people, to which extent his works are based on the existing material, and when and where exactly they originate. Homer obviously doesn't have a biography because, well, we don't know if he was an actual person in the first place.